Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another episode of Meta Monday. This is Meta Monday number 9, our first one since the last new Mercenaries have dropped just under 2 weeks ago. It has been, I believe, 11 days since the patch dropped, so it's been enough time where people have started to farm up the characters and they are starting to kind of show up a bit in the data. So we are going to take a look at some comps here that I've had some experience playing with and playing against on ladder. We'll talk about them briefly, and then I will get into our usual graph to give a overall representation of the popularity of comps in the current evolving meta. So before we get into it, if you enjoy this type of content, do remember to like and subscribe. Does a ton to help out the channel and keeps the mercs videos coming. So let's dive right in here. First comp I'm going to be showcasing is a build from Finny. Finny's a great player over on EU, comes up with some great deck ideas. I did make one slight change from his initial build. He was running Mage Royal. I swapped it over to Wildvine for that extra stat boost, both attack and health on our starting units here with that battle cry. But this is a really cool Kayzakhstan build. We've seen a few different variations of Kayzakhstan builds running around. Typically, much like in this build, you will see Kayzakhstan paired with Longjin here, as all of Kayzakhstan's abilities are shadow abilities, so getting them sped up by Longjin is a pretty big deal, as it allows you to build a golem at 1 speed. So that kind of changes a lot of stuff about this. And build a golem here, you have 3 different options in terms of what golem you're building. So depending on the situation, you can do different things. What this build looks to do, though, is most of the time you're going to be spamming build a golem with summoning 3 6/6s with rush. And that actually enables us to have a lead Diablo here, something we haven't seen since maybe the launch of the game, very briefly. And this is actually pretty nuts, especially if you happen to run into a mirror, as every time you use Kayzakhstan's ability, Diablo ends up gaining 30 health. And that can snowball pretty quickly out of control, and Kayzakhstan and Vol'jin are just rather strong and powerful characters. The thing with Kayzakhstan is most of the time you're going to be spamming build a golem, and then maybe eventually, once you have enough golems that have died, you can Shadow Claws. You can get some synergy with Shadow Claws and Curse of Weakness by the enemies having more Shadow Weakness for that turn, which is pretty cool. I really do love this True Shape ability, but so far it definitely feels like the weakest ability in Kayzakhstan's arsenal, especially if you do not have golems on the field. It's basically take a turn doing nothing to transform your ability and become a dragon. And as we all know, taking a turn off to do essentially nothing in Mercenaries is just not very good. So unfortunately, this isn't seeing as much PvP play as I would have liked, but oh well. Diablo feels rather strong as the lead, and between getting the health buff off the golems and having that additional +4/+4, makes Diablo hit pretty hard. 16 attack, critting for 32 against blues is pretty strong. The other core part of this build and the kind of payoff for Kayzakhstan other than Diablo is Sylvanas here. And Sylvanas' Reclaim Souls is incredibly powerful now that there is finally a way to have multiple summons that get killed off in a turn very quickly. Sylvanas definitely has more potential. Another cool thing about this is there is shadow synergy. So if your Vol'jin happens to survive in the long term, Sylvanas can get sped up by him. Kind of a fringe thing, usually not that relevant, but sometimes it will come up. You have the Death Volley equipment there, so Sylvanas gets really big, and when Sylvanas does die, she will be dealing damage equal to her attack, which ends up being pretty huge. Then the last 2 members of this team are Karen and Cookie. This is just good because a lot of times people focus Kayzakhstan or Vol'jin. They have a harder time killing Diablo because of his high HP from the golems. So that can enable you to swap in Karen and Cookie eventually to get those classic Diablo Karen Cookie combos going with your Endurance Aura, Fire Stomp, and Fish Summon. Also, the extra health that we get on all the characters is definitely very nice and helpful. So I think this is one of the best Kayzakhstan builds I've seen so far. I've seen a few different ones. Some people have tried Galvangar with him. Some people have tried Valir with him. There's a lot of different ways you can go with it, but the main core of it definitely seems to be Kayzakhstan, Longjin, and Sylvanas, and then the other 3 units you can kind of change up depending on what you want to do with your build. So I think that's a really cool build. Definitely the place I've seen Kayzakhstan the most. This next one, 6 dragons. So I really like this build. It is definitely kind of tricky to play for sure, and it can be very opener dependent. However, if you can call the openers correctly, it makes it very, very powerful. So we are rocking Nefarian with the Chromatic Dragonflight equipment. So all your dragons get +6 attack at the start of the game. First time we're seeing a start of the game effect that's not health related like Cookie. So pretty happy with this one. Nefarian's been an incredibly powerful unit, and I think this equipment is one of the reasons why. Next up we have Deathwing. Deathwing's been pretty solid too. The thing about Deathwing is he actually performs a different role in this comp than I would have initially expected. We end up using him a lot of the time for this Elementum armor, believe it or not. And the reason for that is we have a 1-speed taunt here. So if you're going up against something like Frost Valera, you can lead Deathwing, Nefarian, Sinestra. And because of that extra attack, the Belinda Elemental will die on its first hit in to this Deathwing with the taunt. You taunt fast enough to where they can't freeze either of your greens, and your 2 greens can beat up on Varden and kill them turn 1. So you don't have to worry about getting snapped down on turn 2, which we all know how annoying that can be. So Deathwing's actually been really good for that purpose. Other than that, sometimes you can get some neat combos off with Destroy All Life and Longjin with his dealing damage when hit with damage ability. So that's pretty cool. I do like that kind of interaction, though it's a little bit fringe. Onyxia is an interesting merc because I do think they are the most fragile of the new dragons. However, they also have some insane damage potential. We do end up spawning a decent amount of summons with Nefarian here, and because of that, this passive is actually very strong. After another friendly dragon dies, deal 7 to all enemies. Worth noting, this is technically a fire ability, so if you scale up your fire damage with Deep Breath here, and one of your dragons dies, this will be dealing more damage, but most of the time you're going to end up scaling that up to do Cleanse the Nest, and that can actually Death Blow summon another whelp to kind of feed your Onyxia. It's pretty neat. Worth noting that this ability is actually really good. Insolent Mortals. The fact that you not only gain attack but block taunt is pretty huge, because some characters like Cornelius, almost their whole purpose is to taunt on turn 1 and protect your good stuff. So the fact that Onyxia can go off at 4 and just deal a bunch of damage and then let your other characters get through is pretty huge. In the backbench here, we do have our nature dragons kind of lineup in the backbench here. So we have Yulon here with Pearl of Yulon. A lot of times if you're looking to switch up your lead, sometimes I'll throw Yulon in there as he's just a really, really good lead. Feels very strong. And the fact that he can protect your dragons and get rid of stealth quickly is very powerful. Worth noting, there is currently a bug where his second part of this ability does not trigger on Nefarian attack. However, that is being looked into and should be fixed soon. So that's good to know, but be aware of that. Also in Dragon Mirrors, it can be very dangerous to swing on turn 1 because of this ability, so be aware of that if you go into any Dragon Mirrors. And Sinestra, I mean, we all know what the deal is with Sinestra at this point. She sees so much play, both in and out of Dragon comps, and Mana Barrier, being able to heal your other friendly dragons, is huge. The extra attack is actually very relevant with her on turn 1, as you can kill a Varden on turn 1 with her and Nefarian. So yes, and then we all know what happens with Twilight Extinction, just blowing up the board. And then last but not least is Longjin. So I've been experimenting with different equipments. For most of the time I was playing this build, I was actually running her with Band of the Bursting Novas. And the reason for that was Longjin was always one of my last units. I would save her for last, and then you get a really, really large Band of Bursting Novas battle cry because you often have a handful of summons. Some of your other dragons have died, so that ends up getting really big. However, I started seeing more nature dragon comps, and this comp struggles against those if you cannot open with Longjin. So because of that, I've been experimenting a bit with Bottle of the Infinite Stars. Since we are a full dragon comp, we do get quite a bit of additional value from this. Or if you just wanted to use Longjin as a more consistent opener, Kunlai Crystal is also a good choice. That's what I like in the Nature Dragons version of the build. So yeah, I think there's really something to the 6 dragon comp. I'm not sure if it's going to end up being the best version of dragons or not. There's still a lot of refining and playtesting that has to be done there. And the dragons are notoriously hard to play perfectly, in my opinion. And like I said before, I think this is one of those comps that it has a ton of flexible openers, but you have to be smart about it, because if you guess what your opponent is playing incorrectly and you open wrong, you can have a really hard time. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. You know, if you guess right, or if you know what they're playing because you've played them before, then you can kind of tailor your opener to beat it. But if you're going in blind, it can be a little challenging, because if you make the wrong decision, you can get pretty punished for it. So that's 6 dragons. Big fan of that comp. Another comp here with the new dragons is the Voon variant. This is Yahweh's version of the build. I played this on stream. It's the one I uploaded in a video last week. I think this is very, very strong. A lot of the times you are leading with these triple greens here, and this actually runs the spare parts passive to kind of help keep your dragons alive. Honestly, all of Nefarian's equipment here are very strong. This one seems to fit this build very well. The character that really took me off guard was Voon. I didn't even know Voon had a passive item ability, but this ability is kind of nuts because it triggers off whenever a friendly dragon attacks. So that includes things like your summons, especially from Nefarian, who his summon attacks automatically. So this can start dealing a ton of damage. It does 10 base damage, and then if it's hitting in blue, it's critting, so that's 20 damage. That adds up really fast. You can also use Voon to bolster up your dragon summons, which is nice, and Fire Breath ends up doing a ton of damage when you get some of these dragon spawns out there. So definitely been a fan of Voon. Seems to work very well in this comp. And then our third lead here, which is sometimes interchangeable with like Yu'lon usually, is Sinestra. Sinestra is just so incredibly powerful in a comp like this and enables you to basically target down any scary blues turn 1, especially like Barden. So I've been liking Sinestra as the lead with this. However, if you think your opponent's going to be leading Thrall or something else that can really threaten her on turn 1, you may want to swap in something like Yu'lon. And then Yu'lon, he's just going to be a core in all the dragon comps going forward, just because of his ability to scale up, shut off taunt and stealth, and then Jade Gust just deals a crazy amount of damage. But the big thing is protecting your dragons. This passive just does so much in the way of damage prevention. I think it's the biggest reason we see Yu'lon seeing so much play. This one actually surprised me. We're seeing Alexstrasza here with an equipment I also didn't expect, but apparently, according to Yahweh, it worked out pretty well for him. And this kind of, by making this heal for heal as well, in addition to the damage, it helps with dealing with Sinestra in the late game, apparently. I've always been a fan of the Alexstrasza's brooch here, but haven't minded this equipment so far. The big powerful thing with Alex is definitely the Flame Buffet. The fact that you can do like a 3-wide 16 damage, critting for 32 is actually very strong, even if it's only every other turn. And Alex has kind of exceeded my expectations in this build so far. And then Longjin, we're definitely running a Band of Bursting Novas in this one because we have even more ways to summon dragons in this comp. So a lot of dragons do get summoned, a lot of dragons die, and then we get a really large Longjin to help end out the game. And that is going to be it for the 3 green open Voon version of dragons. Those are our main 2 dragon comps. Next up is a slightly different take on Mullihu's recent Frost Tyrion build. So I stole his homework a little bit. I copied his lead because I thought it made a lot of sense, and it seemed to perform rather well for him. So the lead here is Tyrion with Ashbringer, Varden with Chilling Amulet, and Localar with Frigid Winds. Basically, we're just going to be slowing the opponent down, dealing damage with Localar, and just trying to get our Tyrion killed off so we can give this +8/+8 to our bench, because the bench is really what closes it out, on top of getting some decent damage in with Varden from the Localar scaling and Localar himself. But I really wanted to use Leroy, and so far this has felt like a really good comp for him. He's definitely actually exceeded my expectations because I didn't have very high hopes for Leroy initially, but I think he can actually end up seeing play in the meta in the right builds. And he's been very powerful in some late game situations. The +8/+8 just gives him some very needed HP and lets him start doing a ton of damage off the bench immediately. You can also use Leroy Jenkins, probably his best skill, right away when you get him from off the bench, which is definitely a strong asset. And then we have Rogers as our blue. We just need a good blue. I wanted a whole bench that benefited greatly from the Tyrion death rattle. Rogers just seems like a natural choice. One of the few blues that cares about physically attacking in, so she does benefit from that +8/+8. And she's just great at deleting very scary blues like Localar, Ragnaros, Thrall, and many others. So Rogers has really been performing pretty highly. You can also get Rogers as a early switch in to enable a faster Varden cold snap, which I've gotten off a few times and has felt pretty good. And then Thrall, we needed an answer to Sinestra on the bench because Localar obviously gets focused down a lot of the time. And Thrall really appreciates that +8/+8 as well, and he is just one of the easiest and best answers to opposing Sinestras out there right now. So he felt like a natural inclusion. This has been my favorite Leroy build I've tried so far, and it's one I have a lot of fun with, and surprisingly, it wins a decent amount of games. So if you're looking to try out a comp with Leroy, especially after getting that sweet diamond portrait from the event, this is one I would recommend. Next up, we have Drekthar. This is an interesting build. This actually comes courtesy of Frankie. He played this on his stream the other day, and he recommended the list. I gave it a shot. I'll be having some games going up with it tomorrow, but it felt rather strong. The kind of focus of this build is the Glacial Blade here, giving us another way to freeze on turn 1. So a lot of the times the leads end up being Drekthar, Belinda, Valera, or Belinda, Drekthar, and Varden here. So the reason for that is the frost scaling gets really out of control, and with this build, a lot of times you can get 2 freezes on turn 1. You can target the elemental with something, and then Drek will randomly hit something else. There is always a small chance that you do hit the same thing, because Drekthar's attack is random. However, the odds are in your favor. It is a 2 out of 3 chance to hit one of the other targets that is not frozen, so more often than not, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Belinda just is really there to combo our Valera, gets a little bit of that frost weakness on targets, and then we actually use Frostburn quite a bit in this to scale up. Scaling up is really your friend here. You get 1 or 2 stacks on Varden or on Belinda here, and it makes Localar and Varden just incredibly punishing and hard to deal with. Valera does Valera things. We all know what Valera is up to at this point. and she just enables a faster hit-in with both the Frost Elemental and Drekthar, and quick freezes are OP, so makes a lot of sense. And if you want, you can even go the classic Frost Valeera open with Valeera, Belinda, and Varden if you think that's better for the matchup. Save Localar for the bench. Hopefully we get him in once we have a little bit of Frost scaling going, and as our kind of only red answer to Sinestra. And then last but not least, we do have Cookie to give that additional 9 HP to help out with keeping our units alive, getting in some good snipes, comboing with Valeera, all that good stuff. So I like this comp. I definitely have to play it a little bit more to get a greater feeling for it, but if you're looking for something to play with Drekthar right now, I think this is a pretty good option. All right, we got 3 left here. We're going to be retreading old ground, so I'll just go over these ones very briefly. We have Nature Dragons. Nature Dragons is still incredibly strong. Nothing has changed about this list since the last time. It's the classic 3-dragon lead with Yulon, Sinestra, and Longjin. Worth noting, I would recommend having the Kunlai Crystal on for this build. I think it's more popular. More people have the Bottle of the Infinite Stars. However, being able to mess with your opponent starting on turn 1 is really, really strong. And if your opponent happens to have a nature bench, then it also gives them a bit of a harder time dealing with Longjin. Sinestra just does some pretty silly things in the opener, and with the swapping and healing your stuff and Twilight Extinction, and then Yulon's there to protect them. So really, really solid core, kind of our premier control deck. Dragons definitely seem to be leaning that way, where they're more of a control-y style deck. And then we have the nature backline, just your standard Malfurion, Brucon, and Cookie. Just complements this build very, very well, and I think even without any of the new mercenaries involved, it is still a very strong build, especially against some of the new dragon builds that are rising up. We have the Frost multi-open. In my opinion, this was and still might be the best comp in the game. Not much has changed about it at all. It is the Valeera Frost lead, so Belinda with the Frost Elemental, Varden with, a lot of people like using the Band of Frost. However, if you're going to be swapping up your lead a lot, Chilling Amulet proves to be quite a bit better, as you do want that Death Rattle on Varden if you're not leading with them. And then Valeera to speed things up and do degenerate things like snap people on 2, freeze people with the 1 speed, Water Elemental. Everyone knows at this point the cat's out of the bag. It is a very powerful comp. I've been seeing a lot less of Ragnaros, and given the amount of freeze still running around, I think Rag is in a very good position, and I'm honestly surprised he's not seeing more play. I think you could do some pretty surprising things going like Rag Frost opener, like lead with your bench here, like Rag, Localar, Jaina, or even throwing Belinda out there with him. But Rag, I think, will be a significant powerhouse as long as Frost, and specifically Varden, remains such a prominent part of the meta. And then Localar, same thing, natural Frost synergy, shuts down Valeera, shuts down a bunch of other stuff. Absolutely insane unit. And then Jaina to round out all that Frost synergy. We have so many Frost units, and the synergy between them is so strong. No reason to not run Jaina. So I think this still is one of the best comps in the game, even though nothing has really changed about it since the last time we had a look at it. And the same is going to be true for this last comp I'm going to showcase here. So the Grom Frost Valeera. I think this one, the main strength of this is if you're running into a lot of Frost Valeera. If you lead with Belinda, Grom, and Valeera, you can actually shut them down pretty hard, as they only have 1 combo enabler for Valeera. So if you staggering slam their Belinda, their Valeera cannot combo, and then their game plan usually falls apart rather quickly. They aren't able to scale off of that Varden ability quite as much, or snap you on 2 speed at turn 2. So that makes a huge, huge difference in how the comp plays out. So if you're seeing a lot of that, you kind of counter it with a similar build, just throwing Grom in there. And then we do have our full Frost bench, Localar, Jaina, and Varden. Here we can see we actually have the Band of Frost equipment on Varden, and that is because this is also a flexible opener comp. If you think your opponent's playing something that might be weak to the Varden, Belinda, Valyra lead, you can go that instead and save Grom for the bench. Or if you think it might be like a mirror match like that, you can have Grom out in place of Varden here to give yourself a bit of an advantage. So Frost, still incredibly powerful. Didn't really get any direct counters for it this time around. No big thing to stop freeze on everybody, and no real resistance to the frost damage. So Frost is not going anywhere, and that is a good way to kind of segue into our graph here. So we're going to take a look at the graph from HSReplay. So I punched in all this data. So it's been 11 days since we got the patch. Normally, I do like to showcase the data from the top 10% of MMR stuff. However, on one hand, it's not usually that different from across all ranks. There are some subtle things here and there, but generally a lot of the comps are similar, if not the same. So the bigger thing is, since it's only been under 2 weeks, we don't have a ton of data from top 10%. So this data is going to be from HSReplay data across all ranks. Worth noting that all the comps featured here do have over a 50% win rate. I think the lowest one is at like 51 or 52%, and there's even one or two of these comps that's actually peaking just above 70%, which is pretty crazy. One of the higher numbers I have seen for a comp. So we're going to break it down here, talk a little bit about the kind of popularity and representation of different comps in the metagame. So the most popular comp in the game right now is Belinda, Valyra, Varden with their Death Rattle, and Sinestra, Jaina, Localar, coming in at a whopping 2,000 games already and 15.5% of the metagame. Not really surprised at all by this. This is, I think, the most popular build of kind of Valyra, Belinda, Frost, and it just wins games. It's a very powerful comp, and I'm not surprised to see it here at the top. And next up we have Belinda, Valyra, Grom, Jaina, Localar, Varden with the Blessing of Frost for the scaling. So we literally just went over this comp, but basically the whole thing with this one is that it is just, it kind of acts as a counter in a lot of ways to the version at the top here, because you can, or especially if you're running into Vardens with that scaling, our most popular build is the Death Rattle version, so probably a little bit not as like insane against that, because you know they get an effect from the Varden dying. But I think it's still good against both of them. The big thing with it is you have a way to disable their Valyra combo on turn 1, and you're fast enough to snipe down the elemental with Valyra before it can really freeze you and lock you out of doing a move. So it makes a lot of sense that this comp is also coming in at such a high amount of games, coming in at 1,600 games and 12.4% of the metagame. Next up, surprise, surprise, it's another Belinda, Valyra, Varden comp. And this one is, yeah, it's another one with Blessing of Frost here. Basically, the only difference here is you're basically removing Grom and throwing Cookie on the bench. And that's really the big difference here. You know, the one before, it was missing Sinestra, worth noting. No Sinestra in that second comp, kind of surprising, but I guess they're going a little bit more all in on the Frost plan. But this one is using that Sinestra, Localar, and Cookie backbench, so pretty much almost the exact same as like the top two comps. It's just we're swapping out a unit or two and making it slightly different. But this definitely shows Frost, at least in terms of popularity, for now is still the top dog, coming in at 1,500 games for this comp and 11.6% of the metagame. The next one here is a Frost-based opener, so no Valera in this one. Lokalar, Jaina, Varden with the Death Rattle, and the bench of Sinestra, Karen, and Diablo. This one actually really surprised me that it came in so high. I don't know if I've seen this a whole lot, at least in my experience. I think obviously Karen and Diablo are both powerful units still. However, I don't think there's necessarily enough synergy here to really justify them on their own without like a Tyrion buff or a third unit that complements them well instead of Sinestra, who's just generically good on her own. But it's something people are playing, and it's coming in at 1,100 games and 8.5% of the metagame. Next up is another Belinda Valera Varden comp. This one has the Varden scaling equipment and Sinestra Jaina Lokalar. This one is tied with the other comp we just looked at, also coming in at 1,100 games and 8.5% metagame share. It's just, I mean, all these units are independently powerful. They all have a bunch of synergy with each other. And I think that until we see a stronger kind of Frost counter printed, or until we see some kind of nerf to Valera or Lokalar, Frost comp is going to continue to dominate the charts in terms of popularity. It's also worth noting that it has been under 2 weeks since the new characters came out, so usually it does take a little bit longer for people to figure out the new builds, as they have to level up their new characters, experiment a bunch, and all that stuff. So not surprising we're not seeing any new builds, at least at the very top of the chart here. But we do have another kind of familiar build here coming in next, also with the three-way tie for 1,100 games. It is Nature Dragons, so Yulon, Sinestra, and Longjin. This version is running the Dragon HP gaining equipment when you swap, and then the Nature backline of Malfurion, Brucon, and Cookie. This one's coming in at 1,100 games as well, and 8.5% of the metagame. Then we have a classic that has fallen from grace a little bit. I think between the addition of Lokalar and some of these other new powerful characters, GVT, Grom Valera Thrall, with the Nature backline, is not what it used to be. And it doesn't mean it's a bad comp, but it is just, it was for a while there the most popular, or always staying in that top 3 most popular. But given the critical mass of Frost right now, specifically how Lokalar can really shut down their opens pretty hard, regardless of if they go fast or slow, it definitely has diminished the GVT population, and it is only coming in at 750 games this time, 5.8% of the metagame. Next up is Belinda Valera Grom, Lokalar, Jaina, and Varden with the Death Rattle. You know, I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but all these mercs are so strong that they're literally showing up in almost all of these comps. Like the majority of comps here have that same, either the Frost core or the Valera core, or both. And it's not that surprising. This one does have that Varden Death Rattle, so that's really one of the only differentiating factors, whether you're choosing to use the Death Rattle or the Frost scaling from freezes. This one comes in at 690 games and 5.3% of the metagame. Next up, we actually have a comp with the CDC backline. Looks to be the only one that has that in this entire kind of graph report here. Jaina, Lokalar, Varden with Death Rattle, and Karen, Diablo, Cookie bench. Not really surprised by the fact that Karen Diablo Cookie has kind of fallen out of favor for the most popular bench, as it just really cannot stand up against a lot of the Sinestra backlines. And as we can see, Sinestra isn't in everything, but she is in a lot of things. And the fact that she can basically fully solo the Karen Diablo Cookie bench has really just kind of pushed them out of the metagame. So this one's coming in at 590 games and 4.6% of the meta. And we have Belinda, Valera, Varden with the scaling equipment, Jaina, Localar, Cookie. So more Cookie making it into these Frost comps for that additional health. Sometimes it's useful, but again, it's very, very similar to a lot of the other comps. You know, it's really either one merc different or the difference in equipment on Varden. And they're still the most played comps, which is, I guess, not really that surprising given the lack of direct counters to their strategy currently available. However, this one is coming in at 570 games, 4.4% of the metagame. The next one, Belinda, Jaina, Varden. So this is a full kind of Frost-focused opener. No Valera to speak of here. Varden is running the Death Rattle this time, which makes a bunch of sense. So this one you don't really see too often, or at least I haven't. But again, the synergy with all these Frost units is really, really powerful, Valera or not. So it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing at least one of these make their way into it. And then Sinestra, Localar, and Cookie on the bench. This one has 520 games, coming in at 4% of the meta. Then we have Mullahu's build here, actually. Localar, Tyrion, Varden, Karen, Diablo, Rogers. So I really like this build. I've talked with Mullahu pretty extensively about it. We played some games with it on stream, and it is what gave me the inspiration for how to kind of go about making a Leroy Jenkins build. And I'm not surprised to see it show up here because it is a very solid build. The only thing is it does fold pretty hard to Nature Dragons. Feels like a pretty unwinnable matchup. However, Nature Dragons, at least before the patch, were not super duper popular. Looks like they're actually gaining a bit of popularity now, so that might repress this deck down a little bit if that stays the same. But people are trying out a lot of alternate dragon strategies. So as long as it's not Nature Dragons, I think you might still have a chance. But this one's coming in at 510 games and 4.0% of the meta. So the last ones here are basically, we have our first comp with a new mercenary. Like I said at the start, it usually takes a little bit longer before new mercs start making their way into the data here, regardless of whether they're good or not good. The reason for that is people need time to level up their characters, refine builds, all that kind of stuff. And that takes longer than a week and a half, 2 weeks, a lot of the time. So because of that, we really haven't seen much in the way of new characters in any of these comps. This is actually the first comp right at the end that has a new character. So this one is Yulon, Longjin, and Nefarian with Sinestra, Localar, and Cookie on the bench. So going for a pretty dragon-focused comp. 4 dragons here. Nefarian has proved to be a very strong unit, especially as a lead. I can see him going very well with Longjin and Yulon to start it out. Sinestra is just one of the best bench units in the game. Localar gives you kind of an answer to some of those faster strategies or green-heavy strategies. And then Cookie just to help keep your dragons alive for longer. Makes a lot of sense. This one is coming in at 450 games and 3.5% of the meta. It's going to be our only list on this Meta Monday with a new mercenary in it, unfortunately. And then our last list here that we're going to be looking at is Nature Dragons again, however, with different equipment. So Yulon, Sinestra, and Longjin. This is the Longjin with the Kunlai Crystal that allows for +8 nature resistance, and more importantly, being able to swap spaces with one of your friendly units on turn 1. I personally think this is the better version of the build. I think being able to have that swap on turn 1 is very powerful, and I think it's better than the other version of the build where you're gaining more health for your dragons. However, that build does have more popularity among players, it seems. And then it does have the nature bench here, same as the other one, with your Malfurion, Brucon, and Cookie as just a fantastic bench to kind of help support those dragons. Sometimes you get that insane nature scaling off of Yulon. And it's just a powerful bench. This one comes in at 420 games and 3.3% of the meta. And yeah, that is our whole kind of graph here. This is all the comps across all rankings that have more than 400 games played as of today. So it's always a little hard in these early ones because it's easier for people to just continue playing mercs they already have leveled and already know how to play. And so because of that, it probably will take until next time for us to really see more of the impact that the new characters have had, as people who have not been hardcore grinding probably haven't even gotten much of a chance to try out many of the new characters. So I personally think a lot of them are rather powerful, and we are going to see the meta change a fair bit. However, I don't think Frost is going to be going away anytime soon. The core of it is just simply too strong and one of the best things you can be doing in the game right now. And I don't think any of the new mercenaries are powerful enough to stop that in its entirety. There may be builds that might be able to counter certain other builds, but the reason Frost is so prevalent and strong is because of how flexible it is. You know, you're not always leading with the exact same Frost lead. The fact that you can swap it up is really one of the things that gives it such power and versatility. So we will have to wait and see, though. Again, I do try and do these every other week. So 2 weeks from now, we'll have a lot more data. There'll have been a lot more testing, all that good stuff. So hopefully we'll have a bit clearer of a picture of where the new mercenaries are starting to find a home, and if those comps are succeeding in both win rate and popularity. But that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.